Admiral Thad Allen kicks off the CSIS-LSU series on disaster management and emergency response. He talked about lessons learned in the responses to Hurricane Katrina, the earthquake in Haiti, and the Gulf oil spill. He said that while unity of effort is essential, oftentimes unity of command is impossible. He also underscored the importance of transparency in times of crisis. The following is a highlight from tonight's event.
I'd like to come at this conversation a little differently tonight and talk to you about what we're actually experiencing out there, the challenges we're actually facing, what we have to do when one of these crises arise, and why we need planning and coordination across the interagency outside the Department of Defense for non-Title 10 operations. And it makes the argument on its own. It's not like you're trying to replicate something that's going on in the Department of Defense. You're trying to organize and run this government the best way you can when you're confronting a crisis, when government needs to work better than it is right now. At the meetings at the White House on how to move forward and how to best have the U.S. government help Haiti, there was a lot of talk about how to organize it and what should we do. And I had a really long conversation one evening with Secretary Napolitano, who wanted to help and bring the core competencies we'd been developed and lessons learned from Katrina that are embedded now in FEMA through Craig Fugate, who was working with Rajiv Shah over at USAID. How can we do this? And I proposed to her that we create that same concept that we had in New Orleans and we export it to Haiti. Because what was similar between New Orleans and Haiti was we had a loss of continuity of government without decapitation, but in this case it was a sovereign government and there was not a principal federal official. It was a U.S. ambassador representing the United States, and we also had a UN mission on the ground in Haiti. And what I proposed, and Craig Fugate and I both agreed, was we took a team, we took a senior executive from FEMA, and we took a Coast Guard one-star admiral, put them together, took the same command and control trailers and equipment, satellite-based equipment that we had, and we basically took that to Port-au-Prince and put it on the grounds of the U.S. Embassy. And then they became the linking pin with the ambassador, with Joint Task Force Haiti, that was headed by Lieutenant General Keane under U.S. Southern Command. There are very many similarities about how we ultimately evolved in New Orleans and exactly what we exported and did on the ground in Haiti. If I could fast forward then to the oil spill. And I'm going to talk about this in terms of strategy and how you think about these problems going in. You all know the rig exploded on the 20th of April. 2 days later, on the 22nd of April, 3 days later, excuse me, the rig sunk. The rig sunk on Earth Day. The rig sunk while there were a number of NGOs in the White House meeting with the President celebrating Earth Day. And 2 hours later, I was in the Oval Office on Earth Day with the Cabinet briefing the President on what had transpired and what was going forward. And let me make it abundantly clear to everybody, there was no doubt in anybody's mind we were dealing with a catastrophic event from the start. Nobody was lowballing any estimates. Everybody knew this was serious. And everything we had was being moved that direction. Now, ultimately, the requirements for this spill, which spread from Port St. Joe, Florida to South Central Louisiana, ultimately dwarfed even the requirements that were put forth in the response plan that BP had created. But that was all moving. Getting back to this notion of mental models and how you actually look at the problem, what it is you're trying to solve, it became very apparent this was not just an oil spill, just like Katrina was not just a hurricane in New Orleans. We were dealing with probably 3 different domains that had to be addressed and dealt with separately. The first one was containment of oil and well control, stop the oil at the source. The second was get to as much oil as you can while it was still together on the surface, offshore, and deal with it there. And the third was, of course, to defend the beaches and the marshes. This is one of Allen's theorems coming out of this event. The political and social tolerance for a responsible party in that role is inversely proportional to the size of the spill. When it gets that bad, and especially you add on the myriad of issues they're dealing with in the Gulf right now after the hurricanes, the loss of the Barrier Islands and everything else, it really is hard for them to understand that you've got this company there that was responsible for the event that has to be consequential in the response. One of the challenges I was provided was the fact that in order to try and keep the economic vitality of the area there going and keep people in jobs, BP had employed thousands of vessels of opportunity and paid these folks to be part of the response. The problem is we had never done that before in this country, taken that many voluntary vessels and brought them in. The analogy that I've made to folks is very similar to the Minutemen at Concord before the Revolution. Getting back to our Coast Guard roots here. The folks that showed up had passion, commitment, and resources. But some of them had a musket and some of them had a knife. But we had to form them up. We had to point them a direction, and we ultimately had to beat the British. Okay? Our problem was command and control, communications, and surveillance, and be able to direct these vessels where we needed to go.
Will there be any effort to try to bring the media aboard? Now, the military, I come from the Defense Department, 50 years thereof, of embedded reporting perhaps, or reporting pools, or something else that might assist us in not everybody thinking that the CEO of BP is a bad guy and that the people of New Orleans or Louisiana are not cooperating or supporting?
We did all that. Every time I went out to the oil rigs, I took an embed with me, embedded reporter. I took Katie Couric. I took Ann Thompson from NBC News. We had pool reporters out when we were, and when we got to a certain point, we went live with all the video feeds. And I basically mandated transparency. Here's where it starts to break down. You have a second or third tier contractor out there with a guy that's running a work gang trying to get oil cleaned up off the beaches. You know, he's never had public affairs training like our officers had, and somebody comes up and they want one of his people to be interviewed by the press, and he goes, no way. That's not a statement of my policy as a national incident commander. That's an individual reacting to a situation he's never been put in. And it finally got to the point where I was telling the press, tell me when, where, how, and I'll go back and fix it. But one of the problems we had in this entire response, especially when we're working with the media and transparency, and I had this conversation with Tony Hayward and Bob Dudley as well, you can't outsource corporate values, empathy, and compassion to a second or third party contractor. You can meet your legal requirement to set up a claims process because you're supposed to do that, but if you hire a claims adjuster contract, what you're going to forget is the individual transactions, as seen through the eyes of the public, and their evaluation of the effectiveness of the response are going to be measured on how they were treated. That, in turn, plays right into how they react with the media and where the media goes for the story.